Yes, hello. Today I'm going to talk about a topic that I've been basically researching, thinking about, reading about, and also experiencing firsthand for now almost 15 years, which is the encounter that is happening between traditional healers and Western psychonauts. My name is Jerónimo Mazarrasa. I work for the ICEERS Foundation. The ICEERS Foundation is a European NGO. It's the International Center for Ethnobotanical Education, Research and Services. And what we are trying to do basically is help to bring ethnobotanical, so we focus strictly on plants that are of indigenous source. And we're trying to work towards integrating them as psychotherapeutic tools in Western society. We have a lot of projects going on, and I encourage you to look into them, but the latest one that we came to present here is an Ayahuasca legal defense fund. That meant we organized the Ayahuasca conference in Ibiza last year, and out of that came a meeting of legal experts. These were lawyers from all over the world that had basically worked in defense cases for people who were in troubles with the law for bringing ayahuasca. We have brought all of these people together, and what we're putting together is a multidisciplinary team that will help people who get in trouble with the law with their cases. So they would get legal advice, they would get expert witnesses, scientists that can come work on the trial, etc. As you know, if you have drunk ayahuasca outside of South America, the person who brought this ayahuasca to you was actually putting themselves in potential great danger legally because it stands on a gray zone. The idea basically is to collectively help protect those people by creating a super team of lawyers that can help advise and guide trials whenever they happen. I encourage you to look into it, and we have some flyers on the main room. Now, for the talk. This is a frame from a documentary called Gringos Trails. It's a very interesting documentary made by an anthropologist. And basically what she was focusing on, what the documentary talks about, is about the unintended consequences of tourism, but not just tourism, but specifically of the tourism of the people who don't consider themselves tourists, and those are the backpackers. This is a shot of Pho Penang Beach in Thailand the morning after a full moon party. Now, in the 70s and 80s, Pho Penang was sort of a hippie paradise. It was an amazing stretch of beach in Thailand, and it was actually the basis of a book and movie that you might know called The Beach. And basically it was discovered there, and it was completely empty, and a lot of people were camping out, and then they began to throw parties when there was a full moon because there was no electricity, and then on the full moon there was actually enough light to party. And then these things with time grew, and now 30 years later, something between 10,000 and 30,000 people congregate there every month for the full moon parties. They get completely drunk. The entire beach is lined with bars, and the morning after, the beach is just a disaster field of empty bottles and the sea and everything. So here's a quote from a guy that was there since the beginning, and he's explaining. He said, in the summer of '88, electricity lines were laid from the main town of Nathon, and each bungalow resort paid the tea money to get hooked up. Some Farang, that's foreigners, some foreigner hippies, for there was many an old head in those days, came to me to complain about the advent of electrical power, calling it colonialism or butchering the Thai culture and stuff like that. I told them I was powerless and that all my Thai staff desperately wanted to watch soap operas on telly. But they wouldn't listen. The old heads saw electricity as part of the incoming juggernaut of commercialization and clean-shaven tourism that had followed them around the world all their lives. Now, the part that I think it's most interesting is the fact that they felt that this incoming juggernaut commercialization was actually following them around. They were trying to get away from this, and wherever they went, it would follow them. Now, this is the paradox of tourism. This concept comes from academic tourism studies. And basically what it says is that the thing about tourism is that exactly what it looks for, empty beaches, places where there are no other tourists, unspoiled national parks, and all of these things, exactly the objects of desire of tourism, when they are found, they are by the very nature of tourism destroyed. This is the paradox. The paradox of tourism is that it destroys exactly what it looks for. And this is, I'm going to be talking about these things. I want to make very clear I'm not making moral judgments or value judgments here. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying this is what happens, and I think it's very useful to be aware of it. That's all. Anyway, in terms of this, follow them around the world, the one thing that for me was very enlightening was to find this, I call it the Starfish Theory, but basically it was a quote I read in an interview with a science fiction writer. I haven't been able to find it again, but basically what he was saying was, when I was young in the 60s, we were really desperate to try to get away from this society that we felt was like square and dominant, and we didn't want anything to do with it. We wanted to create a new society, a parallel society. So where these things wouldn't happen. So we moved away to marginal neighborhoods. We tried to start communities in rural towns. We tried to create a new thing. And we were really trying to get away with society. What I didn't realize then, that I know now, is that society is like a starfish. And we were merely the tip of the starfish. And wherever we went, the rest of the society followed behind. You can't escape society. The most you can hope for it is to actually pull it in one direction or another. Now, I believe all of us here in this conference and in general are also in one of these tips. We have now seen for many years how slowly these substances and these practices that we found so interesting and that were, underground or illegal are slowly becoming more and more mainstream. And we can see already that things that people were doing in the 60s, like yoga, like meditation, like vegetarianism, like biological food, the list is very long, they have become more and more mainstream and more widespread. Now again, I'm not making value judgments. This is both good and bad, because things are always good and bad at the same time. They're never one thing or the other. And you have people on both fields. You have people that say, well, this is very positive, that now the Western world has discovered yoga and meditation and they can reap the benefits from these things. And you have people who are critical of it because they say, actually, this is somehow... it's a halfway through solution. That is, people now, yoga is being integrated, but it's being integrated into sort of like gym culture. It's another type of physical exercise, something people do for health, and that has been detached from all of this knowledge that came from, really? No. I haven't been talking for 20 minutes. This is slide 3. Okay. It can't be. It's impossible. It's impossible. Okay. So, now it's yoga, but is yoga separated from all the cultural context? Is yoga, it's separated from its cultural context. People don't have the spiritual part, so they're doing yoga like it's an exercise. People are meditating, but they're meditating to deal with stress and to be able to be better workers instead of to follow some sort of a spiritual path towards enlightenment, which was the original purpose. Like I said, these things happen both at the same time. What I'm trying to talk about this here is like knowing this, what does this mean for, what does this mean for ayahuasca, which again, as the tip of the star, is coming into the mainstream. And this is what I would like to talk about. So I'm going to start with a personal story. 15 years ago, I started with my partner, Mark, who's a great cameraman, on a project to document this use of, you could call it Native American power plants. And we wanted to make one documentary per plant. So it was just the two of us, and we were taking very long trips with very little money. And many things interesting happened along the way. But the first place we went to was Huautla de Jimenez, which I think I don't have to explain over here, is where Marina Sabina comes from. And then it was the place that Wasson went in the 50s to rediscover the mushroom cult that was still alive. Then he published an article on Life magazine where called the magic mushrooms. He changed the name of the town, and he changed the name of the woman, but the people soon enough figured out, and they started to arrive. First Bohemian types, then Americans, and then slowly Mexican hippies or hippitecas began to arrive, and the entire town, which is very small and really not designed to handle this flow of people, sort of collapsed. At one point, the Mexican government sent the police and the army, and they kicked all the hippies out, and they put a police station at the bottom of town, which is still there. When we arrived in Huautla, more than 40 years later, we arrived something like 3 in the morning on a bus. As soon as we got off the bus, somebody came to us to offer us mushrooms. It was an empty town. It was 3 in the morning, and the town had grown around and used to this influx of hippie looking for this, to the degree that the taxi themselves had the name Maria Sabina, The taxi stop was called the taxi, Maria Sabina stop. There was a whole set of youth hostels catering to this demographic, as they would say in marketing, and basically when we arrived, we thought this really was not what we were looking for. So we ended up going much further to several valleys across, where we came across this great man that you can see. His name is Don Eligio, fantastic old guy, and he gave us all wiki seeds, which is morning glory seeds. And I had, I'm short on time, so I'll cut it short. I had a terrible night, really terrible night. I was twisted like a pretzel. My hands began and just very bad. And at one point, because I didn't know what else to do, I finally broke down and said, help! And this man and his son came around me, and they started to do all of these strange things and shakes and prayers and chants, and they would press on different parts of my body, and it was all so strange. I was thousands of miles away from my home, completely twisted like a pretzel, and with two Indian people doing, I had no idea what to me, but I decided then and then that I was just going to give up, that probably they knew what they were doing, and I certainly didn't know what was going on, and I remember having this thought, I'm just going to put myself in their hands. And what they did was just simply amazing. It was so amazing, in fact, that then everything began to, I came to a point in the middle of this that I felt, really white and really stupid. I was looking backwards at everything, how we arrived, what we said to them, the questions I had asked in the interview, everything. It all seemed so stupid. Like, how could I have been so wrong about everything? How much bullshit I had in my head, how much I was like imagining, and I had read and I had thought, and how actually different this was. And most importantly, how different it was from the way I'd been consuming these substances, my entire life up to this point. Now this for me was the beginning of a very long process. Like I said, this was 15 years ago. What I have learned and done, a lot of research and thought about, all of these things that have to do with, what exactly is that indigenous people know about these substances and what does it mean. And the first thing that I learned, well, not the first thing that I learned, actually it took me a long time to learn this, so you reap the benefits, is that this is supposedly an old Jewish saying, but I haven't been able to find the source. But basically it says, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. That is, we have an idea of what things are, and we project this idea over reality, and then reality gives us back reflections of things that to us seem to prove this. So every time we're looking at something, we're seeing not only what's there, but what we think it's there or should be there. And this is particularly poignant when you deal with other cultures, especially indigenous cultures. So I'm going to give you some examples of this. I also want to say that this is a very short talk, and I'm dealing with very big topics, so I'm making very big generalizations. I understand that these things are much more complex, and that any of these things I'm going to mention, you could spend a lifetime. So, please bear with me. I know there's exceptions, and it's not true. Shamans. This is Schaube. He's the German Minister of Economics. I was recently in Greece, and I met a number of dogs that were called Schaube. In Greece, he's considered a great villain, and a man who's hell-bent on destroying Greece. However, in Germany, for many people, he's considered a hero. He's considered someone who is defending the German people and the German culture and stuff. Now, when I was coming to shamanism, I had the idea in my head the shamans were kind of like this guy, like the Dalai Lama. They were wise old people in the mountain, gentle, kind, and working towards a better humanity. But actually what you discover when you actually go to indigenous groups is that shamans resemble a lot more this, so that in their own village they're considered sort of like this, but outside their village they're considered exactly like this. And both things are happening at the same time. It's a very ambiguous position, and that's why traditionally not many people wanted to be shamans, especially in a place where disease is considered the work of magic. Then you can understand that every time somebody gets sick, somebody is going to look for who did it. And then when you look for who did it, you're going to look for the shaman, because the shaman has the ability to do this. That's why shamans, often didn't live long lives. And that's why, like I said, it wasn't exactly a popular job, though it was certainly a source of power. So I realized I had a very, incomplete and misguided notion of what a shaman was. Community. This is a rainbow gathering. Some of you might have been there. I've been to a few myself. I really enjoy it. But basically, it's a gathering in a faraway wood. It's like Burning Man without the technology. It's a gathering in the woods of like-minded people, and they call themselves a tribe, and they call themselves family. And then, they live, money is not allowed, etc. We collectively cook all the food, and it's really a fantastic time. I mean, I've had a lovely time. But the point I'm trying to make is that within the rainbow gathering, the idea is that they're somewhere like this. Now, this is a Hopi dance from the picture of a Hopi dance from the 1930s. That is that they're somehow replicating this sort of like indigenous community thing. Where they are wrong is that actually indigenous communities are the opposite of a group of like-minded people who get together voluntarily, right? The definition of community to anthropologists is the group of people that you didn't choose and that you have to live with. So, because that's what a tribe is. You're born into a tribe and you have to live with them. So, instead of a group of friends, a tribe looks a lot more like family, right? You don't choose friends, you choose friends, but you don't choose family, and that's why family relations are always a little bit more difficult than relationship with friends. So when you understand that this is actually what community is, then you understand that all of these dances that they do, and all of this ritual body that goes around, celebrating or embodying the fact that our community, they're like necessary tools for people who are forced to live with each other, and they have to find a way to get through it, right? So I found, that I had a very also incomplete vision of what community was for human beings. Nature. We like to think, we are very aware, and this runs all over, that we are sort of in danger of destroying nature. Our technological culture, it's impossible. Our technological culture, we're gonna skip the questions, I'm sorry, I'll continue. Our technological, we come from a very technological culture, and we see our global warming. I don't need to explain this. Our general understanding of nature is that nature is in danger and that we are the predator, that we might actually destroy nature. No? And then therefore we have to care for nature, and we have to be in more contact with it, and we have to be good for nature. Now, in indigenous communities, they don't have the power to destroy nature. They never had it. It's really difficult to cut down a forest if you don't have a chainsaw, So actually, the equation is reversed. People are afraid that nature might destroy them. So the relationship is very different. The offerings and the payments that many times take place, and their offerings to nature, they're literally food to nature to say, here, eat this food and don't eat me. Please, because it's not like, we're big humans and we're about to destroy things. It's actually, we're tiny humans, and this is a big forest. If anything goes wrong in the forest, we'll literally die. So it's actually the opposite. So I also realized that, my understanding of nature and human relationship to it was, sort of incomplete. The social reality of indigenous cultures today. Now, I used to think that this is more or less what reservations or indigenous villages look like, but this is pictures from Pine Ridge Reservation in the United States, which is one of the poorest places in the United States. The physical, everyday reality of indigenous people, it's appalling poverty, and really, really troubled. It's not. There's nothing beautiful or romantic about the way most indigenous people live in the Americas. Now, in the Pine Ridge Reservation, for example, they've had an epidemic of suicides, where they had 1,000 suicide attempts in 10 years. They had 57 suicides in 2 years, in the last 2 years. And worse, there's now this developing thing where there's these suicide pacts among teenagers, where a group of 6 or 8 teenagers will get together and pact a suicide and collectively commit suicides. Now, it's terrible what is happening at the ground level. It's absolutely terrible what is happening at the ground level. And again, I just think that these things should be part of the understanding when you're thinking about indigenous people, or even indigenous, ayahuasca use in our case. Religion. Now we come from cultures that have proselytistic religions. That is, we try to convert everybody to our religion because they think there's one and people switch. Now we don't try to do this anymore, but we have kept the idea that you can switch religions. That religion is something that you choose. That if you feel that Buddhism is closer to your heart, then you can drop whatever you're Christian, whatever you were raised as, and you can become a Buddhist. This is completely embedded in us. But indigenous religions, they're not religions in the sense that we are. They are actually expressions of the people they are. They would never try to convince a member of another tribe to believe in their gods. So in that sense, they're closer, if we want to imagine something, to perhaps some Orthodox Jewish sects. This is not something that you can easily join, because there's a lot more than the religious beliefs that this particular group of, it has to do with who they are as a people, it has to do with a long history, it has to do with much, much more. So when white people pick up Native American spirituality, they're doing, and say that this feels closer to their heart, they're usually doing something that is a very white approach to a type of religion and spirituality that actually doesn't lend itself to it. And then you end up often with things like this. She's a famous, I can't remember her name, but she's a famous Beverly Hills woman. She wrote 5 books that were bestsellers about the feminine and indigenous thing. And and this is a recent example, but I'll just go through this. This is Lobo Siete Truenos, and this is what he claims are his. So he's been initiated by the Shipibo Conibo in Brazil. He's a dreamer of the Elk tribe. He's a guardian of the fire of Quetzalcoatl. He's been initiated in the Kemet Egyptian myths. He's taken the Buddhist road of Drogchen. He's initiated in the Gnostic mysteries of the Rosicrucians. He's done the Mayan path of the Yucateco. He's a Baobao Yoruba of Nigeria. He is the carrier of the Sioux pipe, and this is the most amazing one. He has a portion of the wrapper of Crazy Horse. Now, I don't know this person, and I don't want to say that these things are not true. They absolutely might be true. But what I would like for us to consider is that if you understand that these things, all of these things, any sort of initiation is long and it takes time in the tribes. Say you imagine that each of these things is like getting a university degree, at least 4 years. Well, this person is claiming that he has 10 university degrees. And I don't want to doubt, it's very possible that there's people out there who have 10 university degrees. It's not impossible. It's just very, very unlikely. I mean, it's like an Olympic sports level of performance. So when this group of people say this, and again, I'm not saying that it's not true, but I'm saying that that is not possible. I have myself found white people that have gone very, very far on these things, and I consider, very legitimate. But what I'm saying is that for sure, some of them are not telling the whole truth. It's just a matter of statistics. Or they have a very, short or ideal misunderstanding of actually the knowledge that they gain from each of these things. And then this is the biggest question that came to me while I was doing the documentary, and is who benefits? And this is a question that you really need to broaden the range of it. I read Michael Taussig, who's an anthropologist. He teaches at Columbia University. And he wrote a fantastic book called Diario de una Limpia, where he basically goes back to Colombia to visit some friends. And it's just his diary. He's visiting his friends, and his friends are caught in the middle of these changing lines between the paramilitary and the paramilitary and the guerrillas. And what happens is that first the guerrillas comes and they ask for food, and if you don't give them food, they kill you, and if you give them food, they don't kill you, and then the paramilitary comes and they kill whomever gave food to the guerrillas. So you're stuck, and you're going to get killed regardless. And he's going through all of this, and he's trying to make sense of these things. He goes back to the history of the struggle, how it all happened, the social movements, and he comes to a point and he says, look, none of this makes any sense. You can't make sense of it, because it's not about making sense. Terror has its own dynamic, and it just takes over, and it just does everything. He says, all I can really say is that what is happening here is terrible. And the worst part of it is that the worse it is, the better it is for me, because the more important it is that I write this book. Now, this is the first time in my life that I've only found this in social scientists, this awareness of the fact that when you find something that is problematic and you go out and you tell everybody about this, not only you're obviously benefiting them, but you're benefiting yourself. Because you find for yourself a new role. And now people will listen to you. And this made me think a lot about this, because I have gathered myself great help, and not only the things that I have learned and the things that I've been able to see with indigenous people, but also my own personal healing and my own process and my own transformation. I wouldn't be where I be today. And look, I got to make a film. I get to stand here in this room and talk to everybody. And I got to transform my life. But what did the indigenous people who gave me these plants got? They got some money. Of course, I paid them fairly what they asked for. They got to be a character in my documentary. But really, what did they get? How did their lives change? No, the thing to be aware of is that these encounters are always asymmetric. Because we have more money, because we have more power, because we have more access to things. Regardless of how fair it is, regardless of how good your intentions are, regardless of all of these things, if you're not aware of the basic asymmetry of these encounters, then you're perpetuating them. And in many ways, and you will find, indigenous intellectuals in the United States who say exactly this. They say, this is really business as usual. The white people used to come and pay some mirrors and little trinkets in exchange for, land, earth, hides, whatever, but they would certainly get the better part of the deal. And now that continues, except what we're taking is no longer material, but it's spiritual. Right? This, and again, all of these things are happening at the same time. I'm not trying to say this is what's happened and this is not what's happened, this is good, this is bad. What I'm trying to say is it only helps to have the full range of the spectrum when you approach this, to have all of these things and be aware of all of these things happening at the same time. So now we got ayahuasca, and for the past 15 years it's been amazing to see how it's spread out, and how it continues to spread out. The question is, where is this going to? How positive? What are the positive effects that it's had for us? But also, again, to try to get a better view of the whole spectrum of what this actually means. And basically, what it means is that influence is a two-way street. So as much as we have been influenced by these things and by this knowledge and by these things, we have also been influencing native people. And what happens is that because we often get shamanism wrong, community wrong, nature wrong, and all of these things wrong about the way we create a certain demand. We come there expecting something in particular, and this something in particular doesn't quite exist the way we want it to exist, but we want that, so we create that space. Literally, we create an opportunity, a demand, for a certain type of curandero, for a certain type of ayahuasca experience, for a certain type of shamanism. And then, of course, the minute you create an opportunity, and then you get opportunists that jump at the chance. This is also because, like I said, these cultures are very, very pure. They're very poor. They have, material. They have very difficult time accessing market economy and getting money to buy basic things. And now the opportunity to give ayahuasca to tourists has become, really a quick and good source of not just money, but legitimacy, respect. Now finally white people are looking, at these indigenous people not as a, miserable Indian, but somehow like a wise man and a source of thing. So what you got is that, as well as the people who would normally become shamans, you got a whole new breed of shamans that maybe would have not become shamans in traditional cultures. Maybe they would have become something closer to politicians, that is, opportunists. But they are building this, and this is happening because the space was created, no?
Final word.
Okay. So I took a writing class some time ago, and basically we would all write our stories, and then we would read them to the group, and everybody would give comments. And one thing they told us is that if you don't like something about somebody's story, you shouldn't say, I didn't like this part, because that puts people in a confrontational attitude, and they will listen to your advice. What you should say is, if this was my story, this is how I would do it. And then somehow people listen much better. They don't feel like they've been affronted. So, I have been now drinking ayahuasca for 12 years. I've been very lucky that because I was making a documentary, I was able to talk to many people and especially reach certain indigenous communities that are very hard to get to and very hard to get permits to get to unless you're doing something like a documentary. So I've been, I consider myself enormously lucky, and it's radically changed the way I see the world and I understand myself and things. I realize that the world is much more wonderful and amazing and magical than I ever imagined when I started, and But also, you know, I have seen the worst examples of greed, manipulation, power play, ego trips, and human folly that you can imagine. And you know, I don't believe any amount of ayahuasca can change that. If you give ayahuasca to a narcissistic idiot, then you will have a messianic narcissistic idiot. And no, it's true. No amount of ayahuasca can fix this. No? Krishnamurti says, if an idiot meditates for 50 years, he's still an idiot, right? This is human nature, you know. I don't want, but you know, what I got to see is how beautiful in the beautiful it is, and how. So, if this was my story, and I was telling the story of this encounter between Westerners and indigenous providers, I would make people a lot more aware of the entire spectrum of things. I would make people go into these places understanding the Starfish Theory. Go into these places understanding the nature of the projections that happen in both ways. Go to these places understanding that, you know, if you have a group of white people and they're drinking ayahuasca and one of them is wearing feathers and singing Shipibo chants, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that in itself, but you always have to keep in mind who benefits and how. You know, if I got so much from ayahuasca that my life was transformed and for the better, you know, is what I'm giving back to ayahuasca and to the cultures and the people from which it originates, is it proportional? Is it reciprocal? Or are we still dealing with some sort of asymmetry there? So, you know, if this was my story, I would make things a lot more symmetric. I would make things a lot more conscious of context. You know, I would make things a lot more reciprocal. You know, I'm going to quote Jacques Mabit wrote a fantastic article called Times for Reconciliation, where he goes into like the mutual projections and misunderstandings and also the mutual problems that happens between indigenous cultures and Western cultures. And what he says basically is that we are both sick of different things and we have no choice but to try to help each other heal. So if this was my story, that's the story I would tell. Thank you very much.